So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar tonight. My name is Sue Hegland, and I'm a board member with the IDA branch serving the Upper Midwest. This is a really fun event to host because we have had more registrations and more interest in this webinar than any that we've ever hosted, and we're very excited to be able to bring this to you. I'm very appreciative of Gina Cook's presence here tonight to talk with you about this very interesting topic. Before we get started, we need to take care of a couple of logistical items. If you're joining us live, you are using GoToWebinar software, and you should see a control panel window with a Questions tab. Your microphone is muted, but you can type into that questions box anytime during the presentation. I'll be keeping track of your questions and your comments during Gina's talk, and we'll have a chance to talk about some of them when she's finished her presentation. We are recording this webinar, and we'll send you an email once there's a link on our website and it's ready to watch. And I also want to tell you that those of us on the board of IDA-UMB are very grateful that we can provide this webinar series to you free of charge. We are able to do this because our speakers, including Gina, generously donate their time and their expertise to IDA and to you. Our branch is an all-volunteer organization, and donations and membership make it possible for us to operate and to provide this service and many others. If you are a member of IDA or if you have donated to our branch, we want to thank you. Your contributions really do make a difference in what we do. And I have one last thing to mention. Our annual conference is coming up on April 8th in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, so watch for more details on that. And with that, let me introduce Gina. Gina Cook brings a unique combination of expertise to this topic. She is Orton Gillingham certified and was the founding director of the Children's Dyslexia Center of Peoria. For more than 14 years, she worked with students, trained teachers, and supervised the instruction of hundreds of students through that program, which is IMSLC accredited. And Gina is also a linguist. She has a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Chicago and is working on her PhD at Illinois State University. Her focus in the field is orthographic linguistics, or the study of spelling. So Gina really has a unique understanding of both instructional methods and the actual structure of the English writing system. She's been a contributor to many IDA publications and conferences and currently runs a website called Linguist Educator Exchange, where you can read more of her writing on these topics. So Gina, we're very excited to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for being here with us.
I'm so excited about this. It's great to be here. I really appreciate Sue and the volunteers with the Upper Midwest branch for putting this together. I appreciate that very much. It's amazing to have so many people showing an interest in this, and I would love to take credit for that, but I really don't think that the interest in this has anything to do with me. I think the interest in this has everything to do with a genuine hunger for understanding, sorry about that, genuine hunger for understanding about how the writing system works and doesn't work. So I'm sharing a little film with you. You should see it on my screen. It's called Insights into Sight Words. It's the title of this seminar. This film will be made available to you to download after tonight's seminar. So this little film is a freestanding resource. It's not the same thing as the archived recording of this whole presentation. It's just this little film. If you run the film from front to back, it's only about 5 minutes. Think of it as kind of a PowerPoint, if you will, but it's animated and it's set up to run automatically. I want to articulate, I think one of the emails that went out indicated that I had a PhD. I don't have a PhD yet. I'm technically all but dissertation or ABD. So if that's a deal breaker for anybody and you want to cut out now, since I don't actually have my PhD, you are welcome to do so. All right, so let's have a look. And I just want to remind you, as Sue said, you're welcome to type questions into the question screen as they come up. For right now, I just want you to reflect for a minute and think about, and don't type anything in. I'm not looking for you to provide answers. Just want to get you engaged in thinking, what are sight words? So I'd invite you to just take a minute and write down a definition or an understanding of what you think sight words are, and then write down 5 or 6 examples of words that are typically offered as sight words or end up on sight word lists. So I'm just going to give you a minute to do that while I bring up my next slide. Along the way, I will offer you some examples of sight words, and I'm betting that at least 1 or 2 of the 5 or 6 that you write down will show up over the course of the evening tonight. So here's my next question for you. Think about your favorite author or educator or researcher in your field. Whose work do you look to make sense of sight words? Where do you go if you want to know more about sight words? So this was something that I had to ask myself as I launched my research into sight words a few months ago, and especially for tonight. I really wanted to see what's already being said about sight words. What is the articulated understanding that's out there? And I was very surprised to find that I really didn't know everything I thought I knew that people might say. So I would say if you don't know what folks are saying about sight words, it's time to make that your business. And I would imagine that 500 people signing up for this are endeavoring to do exactly that, to find out what is actually being said about sight words. Let me give you a little bit of context or perspective. The reason I got interested in sight words, I mean, I'm linguistically interested in every word, but the reason that the kind of impetus that got me interested in sight words was questions, and really, I have to say, quite desperate questions sometimes from parents and from teachers about their kids' sight words. And, you know, some of the things that came up were something like this: I'm so sick of hearing about sight words at IEP meetings. This was from a parent. Tired of going to IEP meetings and hearing about sight words. The instruction is so unstructured. This was another parent lamenting about getting lists of words for memorization every week. Here's something a teacher told me about the sight words being used by primary students in her school. The expectation is for students to read all 100 words, but only spell the first 25. I want you to think about what that says about sight words. The expectation is for students to read all 100, but only spell the first 25. All right, and here's something that a teacher said to a parent who inquired about the way sight words were being studied. The teacher said, well, if you're looking at this from a word study approach, wouldn't you want to tackle phonics skills rather than sight words? So there's an assumption there that phonics skills and sight words are mutually exclusive. So I set about to see what gets said about sight words. What are they? And here's the thing, what I first discovered is, and some of you have heard me say this before, experts don't agree on what to call sight words. So here's a number of terms that are used in reading curricula, phonics programs, Orton-Gillingham and other multisensory structured language programs. They might be called sight words or red words. They're often called irregular words. They might be called learned words, trick words because they're supposedly tricky, heart words because they're words you learn by heart. They're also called demon words. This is kind of fun to Google and see the graphics that come up with that. They're also called outlaw words, rule breakers. I don't have that one on the screen. And, of course, Words Their Way calls them oddball words. So there's a bunch of different names for what is essentially the same entity. This right here is problematic and ascientific. Science doesn't really like to have 6 or 7 names for the same entity. That's a violation of the principle of parsimony or elegance in science. So here's the next question. If experts don't agree on what to call these words, which of these terms that we saw establishes that a writing system's primary purpose is to represent sense and meaning? So again, we have all these terms, And I want you to think about what these terms mean. Irregular words would imply that they are breaking rules, so we need to know what the rules are that are being broken. Red words operates on a traffic light analogy, so green words are regular or predictable. Yellow words, you have to think about something like a soft C or a soft G, and red words are these, irregular words or words that can't be predicted. None of these names for things really creates a sense of confidence in the writing system or a sense of confidence that the purpose of the writing system is sense and meaning. Think about the term sight words for a minute. They're words we know by sight as opposed to what? The words we know, by touch? What are learned words opposed to? Are they opposed to words that we haven't learned? So these terms may be problematic, and none of them, in my estimation, really creates a sense that we're talking about a solidly definable thing within a writing system that represents sense and meaning, which is the purpose of any writing system. Another thing that experts don't agree on, so first they don't agree on what to call these words. They also don't really agree on what sight words are. So for some people, sight words are high-frequency words, words that appear frequently in text, and they're learned automatically or by sight, regardless of their perceived regularity. So it doesn't matter whether it's a word like jump or just that is easily decodable or encodable. It just matters that these are high-frequency words automatically recognized upon sight. For other people, sight words are by definition irregular. In other words, they break some rule, or they're also frequently called non-phonetic because they don't conform to expected patterns in the writing system. Now, I want to address the term non-phonetic for a minute. It's really a misnomer. What people mean by non-phonetic is that they're not easy to sound out. But any spoken word is phonetic. Once you speak a word, it becomes a spoken word, and that spoken articulated word can be physically analyzed. Its articulation, what's going on auditorily or acoustically with it. So once you speak a word, it's phonetic. No written word is phonetic. There's no such thing as a phonetically written word. Writing systems don't write things phonetically, they write things phonemically, and these are different. So let me just give you a quick example of what I mean by phonetic, okay? I'm going to pronounce the word H-I-T, and I'm going to pronounce it 3 different ways, but none of them changes the meaning, okay? So here I go. Ready? Hit, 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 hit. Okay? I can pronounce it 3 different ways. Those are phonetic differences. The writing system doesn't take any note of those phonetic differences, those articulate differences, because they don't contribute to a difference in meaning. If I say hit and hip, now I have a difference in meaning. That's phonemic. That's what writing systems represent. So I don't use the term non-phonetic, and I discourage the use of the term non-phonetic to refer to written words, although that's probably a losing battle. It's a little bit like trying to outlaw the color green. All right, so let's look and see what some of my favorite educators, some of the canonical texts in my training in Orton Gillingham, multisensory structured language education, reading science, what do some of these texts have to say about sight words? So here's what Joe Torgeson has to say. Here's how he defines what sight words are. He's referring to the number of words children can recognize automatically at single glance. This is referred to as the child's sight word vocabulary. So he's not making any distinction between, regularly spelled words, irregularly spelled words, whatever, okay? Now, he's not making this distinction. Linnea Airy, now this is in the same book, by the way. These 2 researchers are both featured in this book, The Voice of Evidence in Reading Research. published, I think, 2004. Here's what Linnea Airy says. She says, becoming a skilled reader of sight words requires knowledge of phonemic segmentation, letter sound correspondences, and spelling patterns. That would really suggest to me that sight words for her are primarily phonemically predictable, if you will, okay, or regular, so to speak. Okay, so right within the same text, there's a little bit of disagreement, or you know, it's not overt, but there's a little difference in understandings between two of the researchers in this text. Louisa Moats, in Speech to Print, does not have a whole lot to say about sight words. This first bubble, this is from the glossary, okay, so this is the definition in her glossary in Speech to Print. She says sight words are known as wholes, do not have to be sounded out to be recognized quickly, so there's that automatic quick recognition, and are often taught and learned as exception, outlaw, or non-phonetic words. So here Louisa is really placing sight words in the realm of unpredictable, exceptions, irregular, outlaw, non-phonetic, etc. That's in the glossary. The only mention of sight words in the index of this book, this is a second edition of Speech to Print, this is the only mention of sight words in the text, and it says, what she's saying, she's talking about decodable text for kids to read, and she says decodable text provides, you know, repeated practice, application of sound symbol associations in word reading. It also includes a few learned sight words that have been previously taught. So she's separating words that are categorized according to, you know, regularly applied sound symbol associations and sight words that have to be learned as wholes. So she's drawing a distinction between, you know, supposedly regular words and supposedly irregular words, and the latter would be the sight words. So you see we have a little bit of disconnect or disagreement between educators. So when I say experts aren't really in agreement about sight words, this is what I'm endeavoring to demonstrate for you now. Okay. So the next book I'm going to show you is Multisensory Teaching of Basic Language Skills. This is edited by Judith Bursch, and this first bubble again is from the glossary of this text, and it says a sight word is immediately recognized. There's that automatic right away at first glance, right? A sight word is immediately recognized as a whole word and does not require any decoding to identify. Okay, so it's about that automatic recognition. She goes on and says a sight word may or may not be phonetically regular, such as can, would, and the. Now, I'm wondering if any of the three of those words showed up on anybody's list of sight words. You don't have to tell me, just reflect on that yourself. She says, you know, sight words may or may not be quote-unquote regular, and she gives three examples, can, would, and the. She does not clarify which of those examples is so-called phonetically regular and which one isn't. We're just left to figure that out on our own. Now, in one of the chapters in this book, Suzanne Carriker, this is the chapter on reading, Suzanne Carriker deals at length with sight words. She specifically refers to them as irregular words, okay? And here she's drawing a distinction also between irregular words and high-frequency words, all right? So she says irregular words, particularly high-frequency irregular words. For example, the, said, have. These are learned through repeated encounters in text, all right? And then she actually gives a procedure for studying these. So she's talking about irregular words, right? And some of them, or many of them, may be high-frequency. So not all irregular words are high-frequency words. Not all high-frequency words are irregular words for Suzanne Carriker. She gives examples of irregular words like fuchsia or hors d'oeuvre, right? These are clearly not high-frequency words, but they would still be considered irregular. So each researcher or educator has a slightly different perspective, maybe a slightly different Venn diagram representing the overlap between irregular words and high-frequency words. And somewhere in that Venn diagram, sight words fall. But for each author or educator or researcher, where exactly sight words fit in that understanding differs. All right? So this is where, I'm getting to this point in my research. I'm looking at these definitions, and I'm wondering, okay, so what is a sight? What marks these words? What makes them irregular? All right, let's go on. Now, Marcia Henry, in her book, Unlocking Literacy, defines a sight word. This is from the glossary. She says students know, a sight word is a word students know by sight without having to analyze it, to pronounce it. Sight words may have regular or irregular spelling. So she's differentiating between jump and stop, which are regular or decodable, and where and only, which according to some set of unstated rules are irregular. All right? She says sight words are also called high-frequency words. So for Marcia, sight words and high-frequency words are the same thing, words you know right away. Now the thing is, it's possible to know words right away that are not high-frequency words, like stegosaurus, right? Or Google. Well, that may be a high-frequency word. All right, Marcia, I just now see I have a typo here. This should say an irregular word rather than irregular words. She says an irregular word does not, she's defining for us now what an irregular word is. She says it does not follow typical letter-sound correspondences, usually in the vowel sounds, such as there or cough. Now, let's think about those. Now, this is really helpful because she does give us an explanation of what makes an irregular word irregular. It doesn't follow typical letter-sound correspondences, and she says this irregularity is usually in the vowel sounds. Now, let's take a look at these two words. I'm not sure if there's any way I can actually type on this screen or not. I don't think there is. Let me see. No. All right, I'm just going to have to do this orally, but I'd invite you to think about the vowel in the word cough. And I'd like you to write down, for your own reference, what is the vowel pattern in the word cough? The vowel phoneme is aw, right? What is spelling that vowel phoneme? A lot of people think it's an OU. And OU generally does not spell aw. But the word cough has three phonemes, k, aw, and f. The C spells k. The aw is spelled by O, just like in log and loss and moth and bother, all right? O spells aw a lot, like in cough. And the UGH spells f. I know a lot of folks think it's a GH, but once we look at an analysis, we understand it's a UGH trigraph. It makes a bunch of words regular. Rough, f, R, O, UGH. U spells, or O spells in rough, just like it does in sun and love and scads of other words. Laugh, ul, f, L, A, UGH. What this really illustrates is that often this idea that an irregular word doesn't follow typical letter-sound correspondences, often that assertion is accompanied by a misunderstanding of what the actual letter-sound correspondences in a word are, as evidenced by my explanation of the word cough. Now, in the word there, I'm not sure what the problem is because ER can spell air. It frequently does, like in the word error or merit. And so the ER in there is clearly spelling a typical correspondence. It may not be the most common, but that's not really what that's stipulating. All right, so we've got some disagreement on a few things now. We've got disagreement about what to call these kinds of words. We've got disagreement about what sight words actually are and whether or not they're irregular or high frequency. And here's the third area of disagreement that I located. Experts don't necessarily agree on what we mean when we're talking about teaching sight words or sight word instruction. So for some people, sight word instruction is kind of a look-say method of teaching reading that involves treating pretty much every word as a memorized whole, regardless of that word's perceived regularity or irregularity. So this is every single word. This is like see Dick, see Jane, see Spot, run, where every single word is treated as a memorized whole. For other people, sight word instruction pertains specifically to how do we teach these specific words that we have deemed to be problematic or irregular or exceptional. All right, so we've got a couple of different ways of viewing sight word instruction, and we can see that also represented in some of these texts. So in this same Voice of Evidence in Reading Research, we've got Robert Sweet, who talks about sight word instruction or sight word approach, which is the whole look, say, Dick and Jane. So here's what he's referring to. From 1930 until 1955, schools of education and the teachers they educated have applied the unproved sight word approach to millions of children. And then he goes on to argue against this approach. So he's talking about an approach for every word, right? Now, Suzanne Carriker is talking about a specific multisensory structured procedure to help students, she claims, achieve permanent memorization of irregular words. Now, I'd like you to reflect on your own experiences, those of you who are teachers or parents. I'd like you to reflect on your own experiences of helping children memorize, or more to the point, achieve permanent memorization of irregular words. What does that mean, permanent? There are some words that I do not have permanently memorized because I will mistype. You know, I'll type the wrong to or the wrong there. I know the difference. I have them in here. Sometimes they don't make it to the page. What do we mean by permanent memorization? And is that your experience with teaching these kinds of words? When I was teaching Orton Gillingham and was training teachers in Orton Gillingham, and we had a particular procedure for doing this, we often had to repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat the procedure with the same word over and over and over, because we really didn't achieve anything close to permanent memorization for a lot of our students and a lot of those words. So let's take a look at Suzanne Carriker's procedure for teaching irregular words. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing here. You will have this film available to you. You'll have this little procedure also made available to you. But here's a couple of things that I want to highlight, okay? So, whoops. Sorry, I need to go back a little bit. All right, so here's what I want to highlight here. All right, so the teacher writes an irregular word on the board, such as said, all right? And she says students are going to identify the syllable type. So in traditional syllable instruction, this would be a vowel team syllable. They would be told to try a long A, like you would find in rain or paid, right? And that would render said. The word isn't said, the word is said, all right? So the teacher is going to write the pronunciation on the board. Look at step number 3 here. She's going to write the pronunciation on the board in parentheses, and that's using phonics, by the way. That's not using the International Phonetic Alphabet, all right? That's using phonics with a little brev over the E. She's going to invite the students to zero in on just which part of the word is irregular, all right? So shucks, sorry about that. What part of the word is irregular? And so they'll zero in and circle this AI. So now we're zeroing in on what makes a word irregular. Well, the expectation is that AI spells A, and that AI spells A all the time. So they've zeroed in and they've found the irregular part, and then what they do is they do a bunch of practice. They're going to make a card, and I'll show you what this card looks like, and the teacher's going to flip the card back back and forth, and look at step number 9 here. All right, it says the teacher slowly turns the card from the front to the back 4 or 5 times as students read the word and then read the pronunciation aloud. So on one side you have SAID, and on the other side you have this little, pronunciation in parentheses. Let's look at step 9 again. The teacher slowly turns the card from the front to the back 4 or 5 times as students read the word and then read the pronunciation aloud. I'd like to know what the difference is between reading the word, said, and reading the pronunciation aloud, said. So the teacher's turning this card back and forth, and the students are saying said, 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 I guess. Okay. So then the new card is added to a deck of irregular cards, and a deck of irregular words, and these irregular words are reviewed daily with this flipping procedure. All right, so this is the multisensory procedure. When I learned to teach, so-called irregular words, there was a lot of closing your eyes and tracing and looking off in the corner and rewriting it. All right, let's do some math. So we're talking about this procedure, right? This 10-step or 9-step procedure. And this is a procedure used to teach a single word, right? At no point in this procedure do we discuss what the word means or how it's used. We haven't verified, for example, that all the children know the word said, okay, the spoken word said. So in 9, 10 steps, we've studied exactly one word, and we have not discussed its meaning at all. So how long does this take? For one word, I'm not really sure, but let's do some math, because here's what I want to know. How many words are we doing this procedure for? All right, how many words are we going through this 9 or 10-step procedure for in order for children to learn them one at a time? So here's what Suzanne Carriker says. She says approximately 87% of the English language is regular and can be predictably decoded using the orthographic patterns described in this chapter. This leaves only 13% of the language as irregular. Okay, so we're dealing with 13% of the language. Now this comes from a very, very famous and very frequently cited study by Hannah, Hodges, and Rudorf from 1966. All right, let's take a closer look at what we're dealing with when we're dealing with this 13%. So how many words is this that we're supposed to go through this procedure for? All right, English. Now, and I want you to think about, if you're someone if you're a teacher or you're trained in a particular kind of approach, think about how many sight words, learned words, read words, whatever, you typically teach in the time that you work with a child, okay? I know when I was running the dyslexia centers, we had about 10 learned words in each level of the curriculum, and there were 5 levels of the curriculum. That was at the centers that I ran. There were other centers that maybe had upwards of about 40 words per level. So we're talking about somewhere between 50 and 200 learned words that we would teach students if we got through them all over the course of about 2 or 3 years of study. Okay, so let's think about that math. All right, English has a lexicon of about 1 million words. Now, most college-educated speakers of English know about 20,000 word families. I have a huge vocabulary. All I can do is estimate, probably have a vocabulary of about 45 or 50,000 word families. My vocabulary is probably twice as big as an average college graduate, but nowhere close to the 1 million word mark. Okay, so English has a lexicon of about 1 million words. The study by Hannah, Hodges, and Rudorf used a sample of 17,310 high-frequency words. All right, that's the study. So when we're talking about 87% of the language, we're talking about a sample of 17,000 words. That's not even 1% of the language. Wait, is that right? 1%, it's a little over 1%, it's not 2% of the language. Okay, so if it's 13% irregular that we're talking about, 13% of 17,310 words is, we're talking about 2,250 irregular words. So how long does it take a beginning reader, or let alone a struggling reader, to acquire 2,250 irregular words? and let's consider that whether or not this is a procedure that's being used. If we have kids study 20 sight words per week, it will take them nearly 3 academic years to cover 2,250 sight words individually. Okay? So we really need to come up with a better way to do things, because that's only for the so-called sight words. So in the meantime, they're also supposed to be, learning how these so-called regular words work. All right, so you can teach, 4 or 5 words a day in school. If you're teaching them one at a time using this procedure, I'm not sure how long that takes. One of the reasons I wanted to highlight this is because one thing I frequently hear from teachers when I talk to them about looking at word history and word structure, frequently I hear, well, I don't have time to do that. I don't have time to look up every single word. I'd like you to consider the investment of time that may already be in the process of being made when we are committing to studying words one word at a time using a 9 or 10-step procedure, and whether or not that's likely to cultivate literacy. Okay, I think we need to teach a kid to fish, all right? Basically what we're doing, if we're studying one so-called sight word at a time, is we're handing a kid 4 or 5 fish every day and hoping that these fish somehow, stick around. So what if, instead of a procedure for teaching irregular words, we had a procedure for understanding misunderstood words instead? Because here's what I find as I look at what different authors and researchers and educators have to say about sight words. Think about what I explained about the word cough. There's nothing irregular about it. What I discovered is that often the words that are labeled as irregular or sight words or non-phonetic or oddball words are simply misunderstood. The authors, the curriculum developers have put together lists of words that they can't explain because they don't understand them. So if someone's looking at cough and they think that cough has an OU digraph, which it doesn't, then cough isn't irregular, it's misunderstood. Pete Bowers uses an analogy of, imagining that you have a map in your hand and you're looking at the map and you're sailing a ship and all of a sudden you run into some land. It's like blaming the land for being there when it's your map that's wrong, all right? So whatever rules we're trying to expect words to follow, perhaps we've simply got the wrong map. Perhaps we've simply misunderstood these words. So I'm going to offer instead a multi-sensory structured procedure to help students achieve permanent understanding of misunderstood words. So rather than having a goal of permanent memorization, permanent correctness, if you will, I'm looking for a permanent foundational understanding of how words work, and through that, of how the writing system works. So I'd like to propose this as an alternative procedure, and it's only half the number of steps. Okay, so the teacher writes a misunderstood word on the board, such as said. Now, the teacher can certainly select this word. Students can do this. It doesn't have to be teacher-led. It can be student-led as students learn how to go through this procedure or process. It doesn't matter really where the word comes from. It doesn't really matter if it's so-called regular or irregular. All that matters is that we have a question about its spelling. All right? So the teacher can write this word on the board. Then what we want to do is have the teacher ensure that the students understand what the word means, all right? So I find it's not very helpful to say to a child, can you define this word? Or even, can you tell me what this word means? Typically what I say is, can you use the in a sentence? Can you use said in a sentence? I might say, okay, so this is the word said, like, Mom said we were having spaghetti for dinner. Can you use said in a sentence? So sometimes I'll give them an example. I'm not a stickler about a complete sentence. It could be a sentence or a phrase or a clause, right? You can just say, use the word the. use the word would, like I would like to go. What else can you say? All right, so we want to just elicit. If we have a classroom full of students, we can elicit a few examples. Not every student has to give an example, but we want to get this understanding in the room. All right, so we want to ensure that students, everybody has heard this word, knows it, uses it. This is also helpful if you have a non-native English-speaking population. Okay, now, you can also, in this meaning part, you can talk about the word syntactic category. That's also known as a part of speech. Is it a noun? Is it a verb? Is it an adjective? Is it a preposition? You can talk about other grammatical features, too, like number or tense. Is it singular? Is it plural? Is it present tense? Is it past tense? Is it comparative? Is it superlative? So you can talk about syntactic or grammatical features in that meaningful piece as well. So the first part is really, what does this word mean, right? Then we want to get students to think about the word's structure. So we can ask them to look and see if there are any affixes that they can peel off. Is there anything you can peel off the end? Is there anything you can peel off the beginning? I don't encourage teachers often ask students to find the little word in the big word. I don't encourage that. Because, you know, you can find the word car in the word carpet, but they don't have anything to do with each other, right? But if I look at the word carpet and I say, is there anything I can peel off of there and still retain some of the meaning? There's really nothing to peel off, all right? If somebody's looking at carpet and says car, I can say, do carpet and car have any meaningful connection, right? So we're constantly bringing the dialogue back to what this word means, how this word makes meaning, how does this written word mean something, all right? Sometimes there's nothing to peel off. Sometimes there is something to peel off, but nobody recognizes it, all right? Sometimes the teacher isn't necessarily sure what to peel off or not. So let me just give you a quick example. The word real, R-E-A-L, for example. Most folks think that EA is a digraph. You can actually peel the EA off. It's the same RE that you have in republic and reify and realize and reality. If you treat R-E-A-L as a base and you don't peel off the A-L, no harm, no foul. You analyze as deeply as you have evidence to go, all right? So if there's nothing to peel off, you can also ask students if they can build on. Can they compound with this word? Can they affix with this word? So if you have the word unsaid, right, you might come up with an affixed word like did I say unsaid? Like unsaid or resaid, okay? So we can also build structurally, all right? And that, you notice what we're doing here? If we're peeling off affixes or putting affixes or other bases together to make compounds, what we're doing here is we're studying more than one word. We're getting repeated exposures to that particular learned word, sight word, or pattern, but we're looking at it in the context of its broader word family, all right? The next part follows directly from number 3, and that's where we're going to look for present-day word relatives. So if we have said, we've got word relatives like unsaid or resaid or gainsaid, right? Those are affixed or compounded forms. But we can also look for other present-day words that have broader relationships. They don't share the same base element. They might be like a word cousin. So we'll take a look at some examples. We've got close relatives and more distant relatives. Finally, the word's pronunciation can get zeroed in on. When we talk about a word's pronunciation, one of the things we want to consider is stress. So I encourage you to say the word in phrases and pay attention to whether it's stressed or not. Any word you say in isolation is stressed by definition. So if you say the or said, by definition they're stressed. But if you say to the store or on the boat or the right stuff, or mom said so, or blah, 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 he said, right? The stress can shift, okay? So we want to pay attention to stress. That's part of the pronunciation, right? And the thing is, we're not looking at the pronunciation until we've thought about its meaning, its usage, its structure, its history and relatives, right? We're doing all this meaningful work and looking at all of these related words, and then we talk about the pronunciation. So all of these paradigm sets start with the pronunciation. Well, it's irregular because it doesn't follow the expected pronunciation. That's working backwards. Pronunciation is going to actually be our final consideration. Now, I'm going to give you a shortened version of this procedure. All right, you start with the word, and then you've got 4 questions. What does it mean? How is it built? What are its relatives? And what aspects of its pronunciation matter to its spelling? All right, so in said, we have 3 phonemes, d. We have 3 graphemes, S, AI, D. The AI is the piece that may be problematic for us. So then we can ask another question, you know, what is it? Why is that particular spelling being chosen? All right, so let's see where this can take us. Now, some of you have seen this concept model before. This is from Real Spelling. I should have a citation on here, and I don't. It's from Real Spelling. This is the Real Spelling concept model, and it shows us that the purpose of a writing system is to represent sense and meaning. That is the overarching purpose of writing things down, okay? You'll see that phonology is our third and final consideration, okay? So meaning is the big picture. Then, how is it built? That's number 1. That's morphology, bases, prefixes, suffixes, the structure and sequence of meaning inside of words. Etymology is our next question, the interrelation of sense and meaning. How do words mark relationships to one another, meaningful relationships? Okay? And then phonology is our final consideration, not our first. Phonology has everything to do with meaning. So if we're not studying phonology in the context of meaning, then we're not actually studying phonology. Okay? So in Suzanne Carricker's procedure, this is the kind of card that she recommends making. All right? So she wants these cards where the corners cut off, and on the front of the card you have the written word, and on the back of the card you have this phonics pronunciation. All right, and then you cut the corner, and that's supposed to indicate to the child that it's an irregular word because it's an irregular shape, okay? Now, here's my problem with this. We're giving the child 2 different visual patterns, right? We're asking them to deal with, I guess, memorizing 2 different visual patterns, and we're flipping the card back and forth, and they're going said, 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 because there's no distinction between pronouncing the word and reading the pronunciation. All right, so I'm not a fan of this kind of visual representation because it doesn't answer the question, why does said use AI to spell eh? So what if instead of this kind of flashcard, what if instead we had the front of a card that had the word we're studying, whatever word that happens to be, and on the back of the card we had an investigation. What does it mean? How's it built? What are its relatives? What aspects of the pronunciation are germane to the spelling? All right? Once we've couched it in a meaningful context, then we have an opportunity to go through this investigation. So let's look at this for a few words. I actually have several words on here, and I don't know that I'm going to go through. I have like 4 or 5. I don't know that I'm going to do them all, but you will have them in the film. So let's take a look at said. All right? So the first thing is, what does it mean? All right? It refers to speaking, uttering, or writing to convey information, opinion, feeling, instruction, etc. And you'll note that here in italics we've got some examples. All right. Then I've got some grammatical information. Said, simple past tense, and the past participle of say. It's a reporting verb in quoted text. So it's a reporting verb when we do things like please go to the last door, he said. That's a reporting verb. Okay? It's typically a verb. It can also be used as an adjective. Most past participles and present participles can be used adjectively. Then we've got some examples. As a past tense verb, thank you, she said. No one believed a word he said. All right? As a past participle, he had said he would be here by 6. It's often said that crime doesn't pay. So right here we can have some examples. You know, teachers could put these examples on the board. You don't have to necessarily think of examples off the top of your head, you know, if you've got some prep time in. Although most sight words are not hard to come up with, you know, sentences. All right. As an adjective, you find this like in legal texts and stuff. My actions are in keeping with the said agreement. All right. Then we have, how is it built? So SAID, when we've got angle brackets, that means we're spelling what's in the middle. SAID is a free base. It stands on its own, right? We can't peel anything off of it. We can't peel the D off, all right? If the D is a past tense suffix, like in heard, right, we can't add it to SAI. We can't add it to SAY. We usually don't change a letter of the Y in a vowel digraph. Now, it's inflected already, so it doesn't take extra inflections. We don't say seds or setting or sedded, right? It can take prefixes, it can compound, but because it's already inflected for past tense, it doesn't really take other suffixes, all right? Then we want to start looking at its relative. So it's going to have relatives built on that same base like unsaid and resaid, but it also has other relatives that don't have an SAID in them, like SAY, right? Say, says, saying. Those are all like cousins or etymological relatives, right? It also has more distant relatives. See, saw, seen, seeing, sight. These all have to do, seeing and saying, these all have to do with pointing something out or showing somebody, right? And even the word scold is an old relative of say. How do I know? I find these in an etymological dictionary, all right? So this is absolutely research that teachers and even kids can do. In number 4, we're going to get to this pronunciation piece, the AI. What's up with that AI? All right, so we think this AI spelling is so terribly irregular. You know what would be even more irregular? To have the word SAY and its past tense SED. There would be no meaningful visual connection between those words at all. The AI in said may be pronounced as when stressed. It may be closer to a schwa when it's unstressed. Da-da-da-da-da-da, he said. All right? You may feel like you're saying said, but if you're not stressing it, it may be closer to a schwa. Because SAID is a reporting verb, it reports what people say, it's typically unstressed, frequently unstressed. This medial grapheme, this AI, why do we have an AI instead of an E? Because it's driven by its relationship to the AY in say and says and saying. Notice the pronunciation of the AY in says, right? We don't say says, at least not in this country. All right, now look at the last line here. See also again and against. What do you notice about the AI in again and against? You should note they're not related, but this is not a pattern. AI spelling is not restricted to the word said. All right, so it may not be terribly frequent, but it's absolutely an allowable pronunciation for the AI grapheme. There's nothing irregular about it. Now, we could take SAID and we could put it in a lexical word matrix. So this matrix represents the whole morphological family, the whole family built on SAID, and we can build foresaid, aforesaid, gainsaid, soothsaid, missaid, resaid, and unsaid. By the way, the word gainsay or gainsaid, it means to speak against something, and that G-A-I-N in gainsay is the same as the G-A-I-N in again and against. All right, it's the same G-A-I-N. In gainsay, it's pronounced gain, but in again, it's pronounced gen. So the spelling has to work for the whole word family. So here we've got our morphological relatives. You see how we're just studying one word, but we're encountering a bunch of them. As my friend Aviva likes to say, buy one word, get several more free. We can also look at the broader relatives. So if these are like the siblings inside the matrix, you know, unsaid, said, resaid, those are like brothers and sisters. In the circle, we have our cousins. All right, so we've got our real close cousins, our first cousins, say, says, saying, and the compounds that we can build there. We also have these maybe second or third or fourth cousins a little bit more distant, like see, seen, sight, etc. And then we've got another set of relatives, scold, and what we can build on that. So this graphic, the matrix inside the circle, shows us that single word we're studying, SAID, its immediate family and its distant family. And it only took us 5 steps, not 10, all right? And in so doing, we're now exposing kids not just to that one word, but to multiple words, all right? There are a few other words in here. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through them all, but you will have the information in the film. We've got does, in which the O spells We've got have, which has a short A instead of a long A, and there's a reason for the E there. And then we've also got the word the with some reasonable explanations about its meaning, structure, relatives, and phonology. So that is the end of the resource. I welcome questions, Sue. If you want to field some questions my way, I know some folks may have to leave right at 8 o'clock. But the archived version will still be up, right?
Yes, I just had to get my microphone off. That would be great. So thank you, Gina. That was really a lot of information. I bet people are digesting all of that at this point. So first question was, someone had mentioned that many of the sight words that you were talking about initially, like said or the, would be taught to kids, say, in kindergarten and first grade. And is it realistic to teach, parts of speech, or how would you teach parts of speech to kids at that age? Would that make sense, and how would you talk about that?
Well, you'll note that in that part of the procedure, I give you the option, right? I say the word syntactic category, part of speech, and other grammatical features may also be addressed. All right, so if I were talking to a bunch of kindergartners about the word said, I would absolutely talk about past tense. I may or may not use the phrase past tense, but I might say something like, okay, so, if every day you say the Pledge of Allegiance, right, then yesterday you said the Pledge of Allegiance. So every day you do something, yesterday you did it, it's in the past, right? So said is the past of say. There are absolutely, look, I'm not a kindergarten teacher, and so any kindergarten teachers in the crowd absolutely have a better, more solid grasp on how to talk to kindergartners in appropriate ways. But I'm not of the mind that certain concepts must be taken off the table because somebody's young. Little kids love big words. Kindergartners memorize dinosaur names and character names and all kinds of big words. So I think it's a question of engaging them in the dialogue rather than deciding ahead of time they're too young to handle this or they don't have the intellect for this. Instead, we want to think about where they are and figure out ways that we can talk about these concepts without necessarily overwhelming them.
Sounds good. Couple questions on the history of words. One about saying, can you talk about when SAID diverged from SAYED, and weren't some of these irregular words pronounced the way they're spelled at one time and the pronunciation has changed but the spelling didn't? So just some questions about history.
The relationship between pronunciation and spelling has always been quite variable. So if you just take English, for example, and if you think about pronunciation, there are many pronunciations of English. Think about the word again, right? Here in the U.S., we say again, but in England they say again. Here in the U.S., we say bin for B-E-E-N. In England, they say bean, right? Where have you been? Okay? So there are multiple dialects, multiple pronunciations, and I'm not claiming that pronunciation has nothing to do with spelling, but it's not the case that once upon a time in history, English had some kind of pristine writing system that perfectly represented everyone's pronunciation. That's never been the case. If you look at the Oxford English Dictionary and you look up the word SAID, you will find that it has been spelled many, 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 many different ways. Some of them reflected pronunciation, some of them maybe less so. As far as whether said was ever spelled S-A-Y-E-D, probably, but I don't know that that was ever a conventionalized spelling. It's not the case that somebody decided one day to change it to S-A-I-D. Look, nobody complains about paid and laid, P-A-I-D and L-A-I-D. Those don't show up on irregular lists because the AI is a long A, right? Heard is the past tense of hear. We have many, many, many ways of making verbs past tense, all right? And so when we say, you know, when did said become irregular, when did said change from S-A-Y-E-D to S-A-I-D, there's an assumption in there that that there's a regular way and an irregular way. What there actually is are multiple ways of making words of marking past tense. One of those ways is to end it with a D or a T. All right. So you'd have to really look to see when that change took place, and it's not like it took place once and then it was over. All right. There's a lot of variation.
Sounds good. So Gina, I think we're at 8:02, and I think we probably can wrap up at this point. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you so much for the opportunity to think about these sight words in a different way, and we will see everyone hopefully at our next webinar. Thank you, Gina.
You bet. Thank you, everybody.